authority on light pollution and marine ecology. Her pioneering research on biologically meaningful light has shaped industry standards and conservation policies, which is what we'll hear about today. And worth noting that Kellie actually has a Lifetime Achievement Award from Dark Sky International, as well as the International Sea Turtle Society. So we are very privileged to have Kellie here. I will now hand over and let Kellie start her talk. Thank you, Kellie.
Okay, now let me share my screen. Sharing is not turned on, Landon.
It is, yeah.
Now, okay. Yep. Right, so I share my screen. And I will share two. And I'll set this up. Right. How's that look? Yeah, it's good to go. Okay. Good morning, everyone. It's 7:30 in the morning here in Perth. So I've had my big cup of coffee and I'm full of caffeine and raring to go. So today I'm going to talk to you not about all the background to light pollution, because I'm assuming you guys all know, what light pollution is, what the issue is, how bad it is. So I'm just going to dive straight into talking about the guidelines and some case studies or examples of the biological consequences of LAN, how we measure it, some recommended ways of measuring light pollution, best practice lighting design, and the mitigating impacts on wildlife. And this is all linked to the guidelines. So I thought it was important to give people some background as to how these guidelines came about. We've known since 1911 that light has an impact on turtle hatchlings when Hooker did some work in Florida. In WA in the 1980s, the state government recognised the issue of light and turtles and required that oil and gas companies developing on Thevenard and Varanus Island shield their flares, and that was specifically to protect turtles. In 2014, there was a meeting of all the national turtle specialists, and it was at that time we were looking at preparing the recovery plan for marine turtles, which was an international obligation for the Commonwealth Government. And we first started kicking around the idea of guidelines, because Commonwealth Government couldn't put any regulation in place, but we figured if we create the guidelines, then they would be used, and that's what's happened. 2018, the federal and the WA government funded the preparation of those guidelines, which I led. And then in 2020, they were officially released, and later on that year taken to the Convention on Migratory Species, the United Nations group, and were adopted by CMS. So they're now globally implemented. So what's in the guidelines? I'm assuming some of you would have had a look. It can be a bit intimidating for some people, but it's pretty basic. The guts of it is just some basic principles, looking at lighting design principles. We talk about how to measure biologically relevant light, and that was based around a publication from Hanel a few years ago. So it was an independent assessment. We talk about the EIA process, and that was important because we recognised that councils needed a lot of information on light pollution because they manage street lights, but councils weren't used to doing EIA. They're not used to doing environmental impact assessment, and so we had to step through how you do that, mainly for them. And then at the back of that are specific appendices that addressed marine turtles, shorebirds and migratory seabirds. But in the 2023 update, the Commonwealth included terrestrial mammals, what was the other one? Bats, I think, and marine ecosystem function. So they're broadening out beyond just the protected species. So why do we care? So if you look at the literature over the last 20 years, there's just been an explosion in work done in this space, looking at how light impacts different species. And pretty much every species that is studied has some evidence of impact from being exposed to light. So it's a huge issue, and it's global, and it's across all species or taxa. So what's the main issue we have with light? And I don't think people really realise that it's not just all the different wavelengths. I mean, we know that all these species are sensitive to visible light, but what's really important for people to understand is they're all sensitive to blue light. So this short wavelength blue light is most visible to just about everything. And so I like to focus on that, because that's really the bad boy for us, is that blue light. This is high energy short wavelength light. It scatters really well in the sky. So it's something that you can see over a long distance. It's also highly visible under scotopic, which is dark adapted vision. So any wildlife that is nocturnal is usually using this scotopic vision. And so it's sensitive to very low levels of light. But if you blast this blue light at them at night, they're basically being blinded. And it's strongly linked to different physiological and behavioural impacts in wildlife. And there's a lot of literature on that. You can go look at that. So what are the biological consequences of light at night? So I'm going to talk about turtles, because that's my thing. So I did my PhD in, and it was light and the impacts on turtles here in WA. So I think it's important for people to understand that hatchlings integrate across a 180-degree field of view and about a 30-degree field of view high. And they can be misoriented and disoriented by this light on their horizon, both onshore when they're emerging from nests, but also offshore. And it can occur over tens of kilometres. But the caveat I need to put in there is it's very much location dependent, species dependent. Are there dunes? What direction is the light coming from? What sort of light is it? What colour? So there's lots and lots of issues there. So the tens of kilometres, may happen in some situations, but in others, it might only be 500 metres. So how do you mitigate against that? And this is what we talk about in the guidelines. So hatchlings need a tall, dark horizon to orient against when they're leaving the nest for the ocean. So they're actually moving away from the tall, dark horizon behind them, which is usually dunes, trees, things like that. But they're also being attracted to the lowest, lightest horizon in front of them, which is usually over the ocean. So even without a moon, you've got starlight illuminating the ocean. And one of the things I get asked all the time is, or told, hatchlings crawl towards moonlight. No, they don't. They're integrating across that broad field of view. And if they were going to crawl towards the moon and the moon was coming up behind the beach, they'd all crawl inland and die a slow death in the dunes. So they don't orient towards the moon, they orient towards that low light horizon. So we also recommend you use low intensity shielded warm lighting. And this is because, like other species, hatchlings are attracted to that short wavelength blue light. But it's also important to understand that they see all light. And so when we hear people talk about turtle-friendly lighting, there is no such thing, because they can see all light. In a dark beach where there's nothing but a red light, they will still crawl towards it. So I hate seeing that term used, and I like to get rid of it from our lexicon. So we also have looked at how hatchlings respond to light on the water. Like, people often say, oh, we can solve this problem, just put a light out in the ocean and all the hatchlings will crawl towards that and not inland. Problem solved. So we actually tested this a few years ago. PhD student Philippa Wilson, who's now working for AIMS. And in this picture you can see here, it's an array of receivers that have been set out in the ocean offshore. This is Thevenard Island. And this little hatchling's got a transmitter glued to its belly. And so what we did was we released a whole bunch of these hatchlings here on the beach just to see how they'd move offshore under normal oceanographic conditions. And so this is what it looked like. So that little red dot is the hatchling swimming through that array, and you can see it moving offshore. So I'll just let that run. And so they're all pretty much heading straight out, doing what you'd expect them to do. And then the next phase of the experiment was to put a light out on the western side of this array. And so we had someone floating around in a tinny with a light in it for hours at night. And we did the same thing. We released the hatchlings from the beach to see whether they would swim straight offshore, as we saw with the other control experiment, or whether they'd start swimming towards the light. And this is what they did. They made a beeline for that light. And when you see them stop here, that shows that they're lingering under that light. So they're basically trapped by that light, which, you know, in itself is not a problem, but it's all the other fish and the sharks that come around and then feed on them as they're gathered together under that light spill. So we were able to prove there that, you know, that offshore light does disrupt hatchlings' abilities to reach that deeper offshore safe waters. There's not just turtles. The other poster child are seabirds, and specifically shearwaters. So they, as many of you will know, nest in burrows, and they're very active at night. The adults are. The fledglings, when they first leave those burrows, they normally do so at night. And the problem we see is that as they're leaving those burrows, they're attracted to street lights or building lights, and they crash into them and they die. They're grounded, they're either killed outright or they're injured, exposed to predation, run over by cars. It gets a bit gruesome. And so the mitigation for this is really pretty simple. You know, turn off and manage those street lights and building lights during the fledgling season. And this is being implemented now. So Landon and I were talking about it yesterday. It's being done in Tasmania on a regular basis. So he can talk about that after I finish. And it's not just those marine birds. In the States, they do a lot of work with terrestrial birds, songbirds. And so they migrating through the US every year. There's estimates of between 300 million and 1 billion birds die from crashing into buildings just in the US alone. And I find that staggering. I don't see it here so much in Australia. I don't know if other people have. I'd be interested to know. But what they've done over there is they've come up with a system where they use the real-time weather tracking radar to track the large flocks of birds as they move through their migratory pathways through the US. And as they see them coming through, they're able to contact cities along that pathway and tell them the birds are coming and urge them and encourage them to turn off all their building lights. So it's an amazing solution, mitigation for a problem. And it's not just birds. There's all sorts of things. There's literature out there that sort of talks to all of these things. Tama wallabies here in WA reproducing later in the season, the breeding season, and when there's less food availability. So there's babies basically starve because they don't have enough food. Mothers don't have enough food. The bogong moth issue on the East Coast, the moths are not making it to the mountains where the possums are going to feed, and so they're starving, not enough moths for them. In clownfish, the marine environment, we're seeing these issues as well. Exposure to the light will prevent clownfish eggs from hatching, and so we're getting fewer clownfish. And even in plants, you know, with trees under street lighting, you can see here, they're not losing their leaves. And so this sort of draws energy from the tree, which then means they're less able to fight off, you know, infection and fungus and things like that. So it reduces the fitness of these plants. And again, mitigation for all these things is really just consciously looking at what sort of lights you're using, turn them off, shield them, and use smart controls. So Marnie had put down that I would talk about measuring biologically relevant light pollution. And this in itself is a huge topic. And I just thought there's no way I can do that in a few minutes here. So what I've done is just listed out all the standard sort of light measuring equipment that we've been using the last few years, and just went through and assessed whether they could detect sky glow, which is something that's biologically meaningful. So we need to, that's important if you're doing biologically monitoring. And then if is it relevant? Is it measuring the light that wildlife sees? And basically, lux meters don't do anything for us. Luminance meters are pretty useless as well. A spectroradiometer, that's this little one here, and they measure the spectral output of the light. It doesn't detect sky glow, but it does give you this information on what wavelengths are in the light, so that is some use there. Sky quality meters, this thing here, a lot of people have been using those. They do have value, but you can only use them pointing at zenith. So some biologists have tried using them to point them at the horizon in the States, but it's not an appropriate use of these instruments. And if anyone was going to try and defend that in a court of law, it wouldn't hold. So the global experts are supportive of this being used at zenith only, not as something you can point at the horizon. But it does detect sky glow overhead, so it does have some value there. A long-range spectrometer, that's a bit of kit here that was built by some guys in the States, Simon Baum and Dan Durisco, and it's basically a spectrometer, but it's hooked up to a telescope. And so that does let you detect sky glow at a very specific point in space, 3D point in space. So you can target a point above a city and get the spectral output of the light in that glow. And then you can fingerprint the different light types in that spectral output. And it lets you determine what sort of lights make up that sky glow. And yes, it is biologically useful. And the final one is the digital cameras. It's something I worked with for 30 odd years, and is a lot of different groups around the world have been building their own sort of systems. It does detect sky glow. So in this image here, you can see the whole sky overhead. You can see the sky glow around the edge here. And this is the process image. So you can then start to quantify some of these bands of light. So yes, it is very biologically useful. So interestingly enough, the US Parks Service has been working on these methods for measuring light for a long time. And so they've now come up with a new system using a camera-based system, but it also they've also developed software to go along with that lets you calibrate the images. So this is all open source. Anyone could build their own system and use their open source software. So I think that's a great way to go. And then another publication basically covers that long distance, long range spectrometer with a telescope. So if anyone's interested in looking into that a little bit more, there's those references. So best practice lighting design, mitigating and managing alarm. This is again straight out of the guidelines, and it's very basic. I think we all know, how we should be managing light. If you don't need it, don't put it in there. Don't automatically pull a design off the shelf and go, oh, we always have 3 lights if we're going to build a building. Don't. Use adaptive controls with LEDs. There's a lot of options and that you can use for dimming and automatic switching on and off and timers and things like that. Light only the area you want lit. You don't need light being blasted into the sky. Focus it to what area you need it. Over here, I guess this one's important. You don't aim light at reflective surfaces. So when we have big LNG gas tanks up north in Karratha, they're all painted shiny white. And if you've got a lot of light shining on that, it's just reflecting back into the atmosphere. So don't aim it for shiny surfaces. And then getting rid of the blue light. So this is the one we keep coming back to. So the spectral output of a LED, which all has blue light in it, and we want to get rid of that blue light. We've got to lose the blue. So I just want to talk a little bit quickly about LEDs. I mean, a few years ago, we used to have to talk about high pressure sodium, low pressure sodium, halogens, blah, blah, blah. We don't anymore. We're pretty much using LEDs almost exclusively. And where there's still things like high pressure sodium street lights, they're all being changed out quickly by councils to these LEDs. And here you can just see the spectral output of different types of LEDs. So your 2700 Kelvin, so that's a warm LED, has this blue peak in it. And then as you go up through the color temperature scale, your blue peaks get bigger and bigger. And so that's the issue we need to focus on. If you're selecting a light for using in a wildlife situation, you want to avoid these big blue peaks. So these LEDs of, above 3000 are the ones we want to avoid because of that blue content. Rule of thumb, typically as your color temperature goes up, the blue content increases, but not always. And that's why we use spectrometers to check if there really is a lot or not very much blue in a light. The other thing we need to be aware of is that the commercial light meters, so lux meters and luminance meters, they're calibrated to the sensitivity of the human eye. So those meters are only measuring the light under this curve here. And so if you look at that, you can see that this blue that we're most concerned about is not being detected by those meters. It's being detected, but it's not been quantified by them. So that's one of the reasons why we don't even consider using these things, because they're not giving us biologically important information. How do we manage LEDs? Again, reduce your intensity as much as possible, shield them. I personally prefer to recommend people use a 2000 Kelvin LED, which is down here. And that's because this is the equivalent color temperature for the high pressure sodiums that we're all used to driving under on highways. So where streetlights are one of the major sources of sky glow, we're now changing out these nice warm high pressure sodiums for these bright white 4,000-5,000 Kelvin lights. And so so if there's ever a chance for you guys to have an influence on a color temperature, this is it. Push back 2000 Kelvin's much better. But it definitely less than 3000, so 3000's here. Still got a bit of blue in it, but the lower you go, the less blue you get. So that's what we want to see. So what do we do about this? Is there any help out there? Any other solutions? So ADSA a few years ago started up a certification program for commercial lighting. And this, in a way, it was for us to not be pinned down all the time and being asked, what light should I use? I know I personally never wanted to recommend a specific manufacturer or light type because I didn't think it was appropriate. And so we set up this program, and Landon led the development of this certification program. And basically we have an external third party lighting engineer who assesses the lights that are submitted to us for certification, and they determine whether they fit either ADSA approved, prized or wildlife. And so obviously an ADSA wildlife light is going to be warm color temperature, well shielded, things like that. So these are the companies that have already signed on with us. And this program is actually first time ever. The Sunshine Coast Council has released a policy for lighting in their area. And in that, they directly reference this program for recommendations for lighting if developers need lighting. So it's starting to be picked up and used by people. So that's it. That's my story. As Landon said, join ADSA. The more the merrier. We were just discussing how we need to get new blood and new people coming through to just help carry this the alliance further. So we urge you to join and to get involved because we need that involvement. Thank you. Oh,
Thank you, Kellie.
There's my question slide.
Yes. Well, we do have some questions, so shall we get straight into them? We've got one there from SD that asks, how far offshore do you think baby turtles are influenced by light?
Yes, so that one I've thought a lot about that, and I think we don't really know, but once they get beyond that nearshore wave zone, the cues they use. So the cues they use to get offshore is as soon as they hit the water and their flippers are lifted off the sand, they start to orient into the wave front zone. So they swim perpendicular to the wave front, and that carries them out into deeper water offshore. And beyond that, we think that their magnetic system kicks in and they start to orient. I mean, they're carried by tides and currents, but that system starts to kick in. So they're probably less influenced by light further offshore. But I don't know. We've not studied it, but probably the first few days that they're swimming offshore, they might still be influenced by it. So if they're swimming past a ship offshore or a rig within, a few kilometres of their beach, then they may well get attracted to that light source and be trapped by the light spill. So
Sounds like you need a bigger tinny and a bigger light.
I tried to do that work over the years, but yeah.
Yeah, I understand. We have another question here, Alex. Ecological requirements depending of species can be contradictory. What should lighting designers do in that case?
So I'm assuming, I know that there's a publication or couple publications that suggest that some species of birds are less attracted to the blue light and more attracted to the longer wavelength light. And so, yes, there is going to be some conflict there. But I think probably, 95% of species are going to be attracted to the blue light. So as long as you manage that, the rest are probably, the majority of species will be protected and covered. But I think if there is a species that is attracted to a different wavelength of light, we just need to study it and understand it and then figure out how to manage for that particular species.
Very good. It must have been a good presentation because there's very few questions coming through. There is a one that's just come through from Rosemary asking, do you have any comment on open cut coal mines operating 24/7 adjacent to National Park? Obviously home of threatened species, including large-eared pied bat colony. What do you recommend actions for community environment groups?
Join ADSA.
He's doing the best today.
Yeah, I mean that's for a community group. I think it's just, I guess, learning about what light you have in the area. Like open cut mine's going to be like any mine we'd have over here in the West, and industrial developments are going to have a lot of light at night. So you just need to, check that that's been addressed, that's being managed. It may or may not be part of their regulatory approvals, but it's really just gathering the evidence that shows if those species are protected species, then you have an avenue to go back to the government and say, under the EPBC Act, the light from this mine is impacting on this protected species, and try and get something done that way.
So there are some teeth, if you like, to the National Light Pollution Guidelines.
Yeah, because they're linked to the EPBC Act, so the Environmental Protection and Biodiversity and Conservation Act, which covers listed and migratory species. So it's a fairly narrow group, but it does have some teeth.
I've got a hand raise from Lou, and I'm hoping I'm going to be able to.
Thank you. I can see. I see. Thank you for the presentation. I'm just wondering, birds crashing into buildings, they don't see the light. They're dazzled by the light. Is that the idea? Why the lights have to be turned off?
I think it's the lights shining. They don't see the glass,
Okay, right. Yeah.
and so they fly into the glass and then just drop to the ground dead. So I think and possibly attracted down to those buildings. Like if they're flying above a city and it's all dark, I think they just keep going. I mean, this isn't my field, so I might be speaking out of
No,
turn
just
here.
curious. Yeah,
But we do know that
it happens. So that happens. So yeah,
Yeah,
that's the thing.
yeah.
Thank you. Yep.
There are certainly examples of just exhaustion as well, because they get trapped in these buildings. We see them circling, and I think the most famous example of that is obviously the Twin Towers Memorial in New York, where they had a huge number of fatalities. Those birds weren't actually hitting anything; they were just simply becoming exhausted from flying around in circles for so long that they were falling to their deaths. So it's not just hitting the buildings; there's also that exhaustion factor.
Right.
This is a really hard question from Joe here, because it's this could be a whole webinar in itself. But what needs to happen at state and/or federal level to really get the message of Alan across the consciousness of those can change things, change the standards, etc. And we probably have a real life example of this happening at the moment, Kelly.
Yes, we do, don't we, Landon? So in the last few weeks, ADSA took a petition, or put up a petition, which some of you may well have seen and signed on for, and to try and get the government, the Commonwealth government, to just recognise light as a pollutant, because under the current legislation at state and federal level, it's not. And so we just want them to actually now educate them to learn about light as a pollutant, and then try and think more about how we can specifically have it recognised under regulations. So we're starting at the Commonwealth level. A lot of us work with our state government people on this already, but it's just getting to those politicians and educating people about the issue and just how bad it is, and growing every year globally. Do you want to add to that, Landon?
No, look, other than we've obviously got a lot of people attending here that are, very aware of the subject and interested in the subject, and ADSA are always looking for more volunteers and people about this area. So, if it's you're able to contribute more than a membership, always just reach out to us on our website, because we are always looking for more resources to help with these sorts of challenges. I think the next question is probably going to be, I'm looking for street lighting. Are you aware of, and this is from Hugh, are you aware of any commercially available LED lighting with colour temperatures under 2,500 K?
So that last slide I showed you with the ADSA certified program, if you go to the ADSA approved site, and Landon can talk to this a bit more, you'll find some options there.
And someone has actually pointed that out. It is true, there are plenty of commercially available LED lighting fixtures with colour temperatures under 2.5. The biggest problem that we have as councils is that they are not necessarily approved by your local energy provider. There are ways around this. There are now a lot of councils across Australia that are taking back ownership of their street lighting from their power authority. We are seeing changes to the way the Australian Energy Regulator charges for power, with built-in monitoring about to be approved at the end of this year, where you'll be able to use whatever light you want and then just pay for the energy that you use. But ultimately, it does mean for a council, if to get away from this problem that our power authorities are not willing to really look at any of these newer technologies, you do have to look at taking on the maintenance yourself. So I see with the charges and the way that power authorities are, shall we say, having a lend of councils, it's probably not a bad thing to look at those options. But yeah, certainly there is. It doesn't happen under the traditional model, but there are many ways that you can look at fittings under 2.5, and there are many options out there to do so.
So what we often recommend around turtle nesting breaches is, if you're using LEDs, there's also amber and PC amber, which is that orange color, which is most equivalent to the old low pressure sodium, and it has no blue in it. But you know, we get pushback on that because they're a bit more expensive. And with the PC amber, it's like any LED. Well, traditionally, this might be changing, but basically they're all blue chips, and then there's phosphor coating on the lens of the a light, and so that's what changes that color temperature. And over time, that coating can break down. So what might be like a PC amber light, phosphor coated amber light, with time may degrade to a blue light if that maintenance program isn't in place and they haven't replaced the LEDs.
Right, well, we might leave this as our last and final question. Alex come back with another one, but please use line as well. That's not even a question, it's just a stance. It just says, please use line as well to deal with those wildlife and septet requirements need to be balanced. Councils, need to be concerned about safety, and we had a big discussion on this yesterday, that it is the one big pushback that we always get when we are looking and talking with federal government and state governments about policy change. But of course, as we all know, there is no link between more light and more safety. Certainly the Australian standards have removed all references of that. And certainly the research is pointing that it is all about balance and quality. So with that, we will thank everybody. A quick reminder that our next webinar is in November. If we haven't registered, it's energy efficient lighting for communities. Yeah, so the Institute of Public Works Engineering Australia, we've got Paul Gowan giving that talk, so please jump on and register for that. But most importantly, Kelly, I can't thank you enough for what was a fascinating and interesting talk.
Thank you.
And thank you everyone for attending.
Okay.